Tonight, Rolling Stone retracting its article about rape on college campus and apologizing to the University of Virginia and the fraternity that was spotlighted. But even though there was tons of smoke, why wasn't anybody at the magazine canned as a result? Then a game of deal or no deal when it comes to Iranian nukes. The framework is done, but now it is time to sell it to not only Congress, but the American public. We'll explain how President Obama is working overtime to try and get more folks than not on his side of the page. In Brooklyn, well, we know it's got a lot of hipsters. Don't forget the cyclone and a lot more. But it better get ready because Hillary Clinton is actually rolling into town. That choice of location tells you quite a bit about the candidate and the borough she will be calling headquarters. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. And we do start with that Rolling Stone story. And Andrew, a magazine not unaccustomed to breaking stories. Everyone thought that this was a huge bombshell when they did it, and now they're doing a whole lot of backstepping. And there had been a lot of questions about this story, Rich, but today was a major development in the case. The magazine apologizing today about that discredited story called A Rape on Campus. It detailed allegations of a sexual assault at the University of Virginia and one of their fraternities. The frat is now taking legal action after the story was thoroughly debunked. And the magazine issued a full retraction after a scathing new report from Columbia University.
The investigation's conclusion was blunt. Rolling Stone's bombshell article was bad journalism, pure and simple.
There are systematic failures, collective failures.
Columbia University's School of Journalism found that Rolling Stone failed to engage in basic, even routine journalistic practice before it published a story about a brutal gang rape that a student claimed she was subjected to at a UVA frat party. The magazine has retracted the story, but nobody will lose their jobs over the piece, even though Columbia concluded that the reporter and her editors failed to check even the most basic details of the story, failed to give the accused a fair opportunity to respond, and allowed their trust in one source to override the basic tenets of investigative journalism. That source was the alleged victim, a woman identified only as Jackie. A 5-month investigation by the Charlottesville, Virginia police led to this conclusion in late March.
There is no substantive basis to conclude what is described in that article happened that night.
UVA's president said in a statement, quote, "Irresponsible journalism unjustly damaged the reputations of many innocent individuals and the University of Virginia." Students there say the article will have a lasting impact on the campus and the community.
To have this one story represent all of sexual assaults across campuses is really detrimental to our efforts.
And we're going to get into that subject and a lot more that come out of this story. Let's bring in our panel right now. Jeannie Zano, professor of political science at Iona College, as well as professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Michael Tobman, independent political consultant. And Andrew Whitman, who you met before, our senior political correspondent. I'll start with you, Andrew. What jumped out at you most about the story? The just unbelievable lack of sourcing, lack of double check. I mean, all the way up, through various levels. This is not some, rinky-dink website here. This is Rolling Stone, Hunter S. Thompson and everything else that comes along with the history. Or is it some of the consequences, the dominoes that did or didn't fall after it?
Well, the consequences are clearly something that need to be taken seriously. For me, I looked at it from a journalistic standpoint, and the systemic failure on Rolling Stone's part, it wasn't just the writer, it wasn't just the reporter, but the editors, the fact checkers, and the lack of a really good system for making sure that everybody was on the same page and had the article going in the direction that it needed to go. I also felt like it was something of a bit of conclusion shopping, that the reporter, and this came through in the Columbia report, started the process by saying, I'm looking for an example of an on-campus rape where the victim was not treated fairly, and then essentially went shopping, reaching out to a contact at the University of Virginia, and that sort of misguided the story from the very beginning. You can't do that in a science laboratory, and you can't do that with journalism. You can't come up with your conclusion first and then figure out the facts that get you there.
And that may be, Dominic, a symptom of where we are, but before we look at, the halcyon great old days of how it used to be, I imagine, just take New York City, there used to be 10 dailies, right? They fought, for scoops every day here, and I doubt they always had 3 or 4 sources. Yellow journalism came from a certain place. That said, you got to feel part of this, even though they weren't on a deadline. Part of this was, you have a story now, get it out there. It doesn't seem to be, you don't have the Edward R. Murrows or the William Paleys of the world here saying you got to get your 3 sources, you got to show me everything before we go to press with it. What do you think the reality is that really kind of birthed this story?
One, it's a reflection of downsizing in the media industry, and you're going to see a lot more of these, unfortunately, a lot more in different aspects, not maybe alleged rape or rape. But when you're cutting the newsroom down, it's happening with governments. You know, it's not that much attention paid as it used to be to city governments and state governments. These types of things are going to happen. I know for a fact when magazines do articles on you, with my experience, at least 4 people call you to fact check and to double check spelling of your name, your exact address. Did you say exactly this? None of that really happened here. And like Andrew said, the journalists went looking for a narrative first rather than looking for the facts. A recipe for a disaster. And the reason why no one's been fired is because this goes all the way up to the managing editor, who apparently approved this script. And if your number 2 or number 3 at the magazine approved this script, are you going to fire your managing editor? I think not.
Well, it's interesting. Jan Wenner, who's certainly not a nobody when it comes to the publishing world or somebody who's a big player in media, he is, as Dominic said, he's going to stand by his staff here, and nobody's going to be canned. I got to think also, Michael, that that's partly because there will be litigation out of this. The fraternity's already announced that there's going to be a lawsuit. The college may follow suit as well here. And, you know, it's a shell game. You fire somebody, you're acknowledging you made a mistake here. I guess that would open you up for more exposure.
It really is a tragedy that the issue this is about is sexual assault and sexual crimes on campus, because it does the issue a tremendous disservice, and it's a very real issue. But the issue does inform some of the conversations I'm sure took place at the magazine. And there may be a generational shift here at play as well. If you have a bunch of young people in a room, nobody wants to be the one to speak out and say this story on sexual assault doesn't feel fully formed, this doesn't feel fully baked. Where are you on this? Nobody in the institution wants to be known as the person that said no to this story. And I absolutely agree. You know, the Times story today on this, and it would have been so interesting to see where David Carr and what he would have written on this, and I think we all missed out on that. Compared this to Jason Blair. Well, with Jason Blair at the Times, the executive editor of the Times and the number 2 went down because of this. So I agree. Nobody wants to have that level of culpability because nobody wants to give up their own
somebody
job.
wasn't candid. Right. Coming back to the subject matter and possibly the unintended consequences of this. In the last month, I've talked to both Senators Gillibrand, Senator Blumenthal, who are working to try and make not only the reporting, but also the processing and prosecution of sexual assaults, especially as it relates to college campuses, that much more streamlined. You know, Michael mentioned the Times. Well, the Times this weekend had a woman share her own personal story about being sexually assaulted at University of Virginia in the 90s. And in this particular case, the college agreed something improper happened and put a letter in the guy's file. Is there a fear, you think, that there could be a chilling adverse consequence out of this story, that maybe somebody won't come forward now because they're worried that it won't be covered the right way or whatever else, and that their claims will go out the window?
Absolutely. We heard the Attorney General make that case. We heard the president of UVA make that case. We heard many of the people working there and many people on college campuses. And I think what is so destructive about this story is that when they are looking for their narrative, and I agree with Andrew, that's what they were doing. They were looking for a story that had all the bells and whistles, you know, that had everything. And that's not 99% of the cases you're going to find on college campuses or elsewhere. They're not, you know, exciting enough to hold a front page story in Rolling Stone. And all of those get put by the wayside, and you settle on a story of which there seems to be absolutely no truth. And so it's very destructive, I think, as we go forward. And also, I mean, let's not forget, innocent people have been hurt by this. You know, it was a journalism mistake, but innocent people, both at UVA and young men in that fraternity and the fraternity itself, were hurt, as well as administrators who were questioned repeatedly about what they had and had not done in this case. So a lot of innocent people were hurt. It is a tragedy, and you can bet people won't come forward as a result.
I keep thinking about the next student who is a victim of sexual assault, and he or she doesn't feel like they've gotten justice from the school or from the police, and looks for an avenue to go public, and will they think twice about it? Will they be criticized because of mistakes like this one, or what we heard about the Duke lacrosse story, or the Hofstra story from a few years ago? There are enough examples of this where I think it does potentially have a chilling effect, not just on victims coming forward, but also on the push for reform. You mentioned Senators Gillibrand and Blumenthal and others. That's a necessary reform push that I think may get put on the back burner as a result.
And I'll only say that you touched on it. It's part of the reality of our business that you have to have. It's not just the sexual assault. You had to have a whole fraternity there. You had to have under the haze of a crazy party. That you had to have, you know what I mean? And if you keep upping the ante, that you have to have a story to go along with an incident, and that it has to have this narrative and everything, which is where we go nowadays. That's where you open yourselves up here
not
to
just
so
Rolling
much.
Stone. The New York Times Sunday magazine a month or so ago had a story on the process surrounding rape and sexual crimes at Stanford. And the reporting on that, everybody just felt icky having read that.
Yeah.
It's an immature word, I get it, but the story was weird, the characters were weird, the people involved in the process, and the university is saying these are all deeply flawed people we're talking about, but there's a process we're trying to figure out about what goes on in the bedroom between consenting adults. And one was a supervisor in a mentor program, the other one was a mentee who... reporting on this, no matter what the publication, is very shaded.
Fair
It's
enough,
very
but
difficult.
when a mistake is made, we always know that if you put your name to something, there's a check and a balance, whether it's a newspaper, a magazine, a broadcast. At the end of the day, there's got to be some accountability to it, and to me, I'm still waiting for it, but this is hardly over, this story. Okay. We want you to be a part of our conversation. You can head over to Facebook and Twitter and sound off. And it really dealt with the last point that we discussed here. Should Rolling Stone be held liable for damages to the fraternity depicted, let alone the college, in the story Rape on Campus? All right, when we come back, we will switch gears. President Obama, he's doing a full court press to sell the Iranian nuclear deal to both the press, the Congress, and of course, the American public. The question is it selling?